welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Turn the Page. I'm your host today, Jen, and today I am joined by the author of many things, but of one beautiful book in particular that we are here to discuss today. It's a gorgeous work of historical fiction about some historical figures that you might be familiar with, some that you might be less familiar with, but it's all so fascinating and so moving. So welcome to the show. Could I ask you to introduce yourself and your book, please?
Thank you. I am Lynn Cullen, and this is my book, When We Were Brilliant. And it is about Marilyn Monroe, who I've always wanted to write about, and Eve Arnold, the documentary photographer who deserves to be much better known than she is now. And they were good friends.
I am so glad that I know more about Eve now. She's an absolutely fascinating figure, and she's a fascinating narrator of your book. Before we get too much into that, though, could you tell us a little bit about your writing career in general, perhaps some of your other works? I'm curious about what draws you to historical fiction as the genre that you play in.
Ooh, that's a big question. We could talk all day about all that you just asked. But I am in historical fiction because I love history. To me, it's just like a huge puzzle. And the more pieces you have of the puzzle, you know how when you're doing a jigsaw puzzle, how they come together more quickly, the more pieces you have. And that's what being involved in history. And my books actually link in some ways to each other. But the more pieces you have, the more quickly it comes together and more interesting it is. So I'm really just here as a big puzzle solver. And I tend to write about women who, and I write about women. I started out writing about women very consciously, just thinking, this is what I know. They say, write what you know. I know what it's like, and I just really want to be true to how it is, the way some of us think. It's really, my books tend to be really psychological. I hope that at least that's what readers get from it, because that's what I am doing. I tend to look at uh, well-known historical figures or people who should be well-known. They're behind the important figures. And I just like to bring them to the light if I possibly can. Um,
Yes, that's beautiful. I was, before I was a librarian, I was a historian. I got a PhD in medieval women's history. And so I've also always been interested in what women's lives were like at various points in history. And especially when you add the sort of high profile women that you are writing about, there's just so many interesting stories and just so much potential. What is it that tends to draw you to a subject? For instance, what drew you to writing about Marilyn Monroe and Eve Arden?
Arnold.
Arnold, oh my gosh. I kept doing that when I was describing the book to people. Their names are so close. I'm sorry.
You are not the first. And I think when I first started out talking about her, I said the same. So Eve Arden really has a fan base, or people know of her. But this is Eve Arnold. And what got me on this road was my whole life I wanted to know more about Marilyn Monroe. And as I mentioned, I really am interested in the psychology of my subjects. Why do they do what they do? What are they thinking deep down? And how are they different? And the more I find out about people, the more they are radically different than their image. The real person is always so much different, and that's so fascinating for me. So I wanted to write about Marilyn since I was young. I've been just wondering about her since I was a child and saw her in the 7-Year Itch. I wondered, I was about 8 years old when I first saw it, and I thought, is this how women are supposed to be? I think she's really beautiful and smart and good, but it seems like she's always being chased all the time, and she's always somehow flitting out of their nets so gracefully. And I just thought, is this how it is for women? And as I got older, of course, my interest stayed with her, but there are so many books written about her, as well as, films. There's just so much material on her. And I wondered how I could do it and still have a different take. And it occurred to me last year that, um, what would one of her photographers have to say about her? Because Marilyn, if nothing else, made herself through photography. She was very conscious that her photographs are what made her. And this was during a magazine age, when she was, rising. And so people just became familiar through magazines of her. And so I thought, what about the women? Oh, that's a good angle. Lynn, you who does women's works. What about the women who photographed her? And I found there was only one, just one woman. This was Eve Arnold. And, there were some women who have taken her in a group, but Eve was the only one that repeatedly photographed her. She actually sought out Eve. And if you see Eve's photos of her, you quickly see that Marilyn looks different in those photos than any other ones. If you had a big wall display of Marilyn's many photographs and threw a few of Eve's photos in there, you could find Eve's. They're because Marilyn looks different. She looks totally different. They're relating to each other differently through the lens. And I thought, oh, wow, I could really get to know Marilyn this way. And when I found out about Eve, I know Eve's big push was to know the inner person. And that's really my big desire with my books, is to know the inner lives of people, of these, people who have touched me in some way. And so here Eve is, you know, showing this side of Marilyn that nobody else can show. Yet when Marilyn died, Eve took all her photos off the market. She would not let any of her photographs be seen. And she didn't allow them to be seen for 25 years. And it was Elton John's Candle in the Wind. She was actually in a car traveling across the US, because she was at that time doing a book about the US, just, who are we? Who are we as a country? And she heard Candle in the Wind come on. And it was hearing that made her decide that she was going to hold her silence no longer about Marilyn Monroe. And so my book was written to understand, why did she hold back on these photos? What was their relationship? And what was it about that song that made her reveal Marilyn and herself? She really revealed herself through their relationship and their photographs.
It's, oh my gosh, so fascinating. You are absolutely correct that those photos are so striking and they are unlike anybody else's photographs of her.
She doesn't even look like her, does she?
No,
In some, she.
oh. And when you know that, like, it's really interesting to me that so often, even in your book, like people refer to Marilyn as naive or guileless. She was anything but guileless. She was so in control of her image. And I think used that image of herself as guileless to her advantage. And so I feel like you can sort of see her through the scenes of photography and her interactions with Eve, her sort of like, I don't know, like dancing with the camera. She's sort of like sparring with Eve verbally sometimes. It's such an interesting relationship. Like so much is revealed about them in those scenes. What was it like to sort of reverse engineer from the photographs what those sessions may have been like?
Well, I also had another source besides the photographs. When Eve decided to lift her embargo on her own photos of Marilyn, she wrote a book.
Mm.
It's called Marilyn Monroe: An Appreciation. And I got hold of that book, which at the time was out of print. Interestingly enough, they just reprinted it last year. It's gorgeous. Here are all these photos of Marilyn, but even more precious, or as precious, I should say, is her description of what was going on behind the scenes and how she felt and the things that confused her, things she didn't understand about Marilyn. It's all right there. And so I just had this book to write as a framework to Eve's own thoughts on her relationship with Marilyn and Eve's photographs. So it's just a matter of putting together another puzzle. I tell you, I'm just a big puzzle solver, or at least I try to solve them. That was just putting together those pieces from the photos and her description of what was going on. And then, there were other things I had to also piece together because this went on over the 10-year span of their relationship. That's how long they were together. I had to, put it within the framework as well as what was going on in both of their lives. So it wasn't strictly this book. I had to know what Eve was doing and all the trials that Eve was going through and trying to make her own name and her own personal relationship. And the same for Marilyn. Marilyn had, these were Marilyn's glory years, 1952 to 1962. So there's just a lot of material that I had to weave together.
And when it's somebody who is so high profile like Marilyn, is that a more difficult process? Because like to continue the puzzle metaphor, it's like an 1,000-piece puzzle as opposed to like if you pick somebody lesser known, it might be like an 100-piece puzzle.
Yeah. I just found it more fun.
Mm.
It's more fun to look at all the other pieces. And I have to say, I did look at other photographers' work of her. That was an important part of my research, to look at their collections of her and to read about their relationships. Several others wrote books about, similar to Eve's, about their relationship and had the photos. And I used, the difference between their relationships and what Marilyn revealed to them. And there's talk said, and I think this is a large of it, about the male gaze and how their gaze upon Marilyn shaped how she looked. I think you kind of alluded to this. I think Marilyn sometimes worked that. She's like, if that's how they want me to look, I'm going to bring it. But I think in the long run, she really wanted her real self known in a way that only another woman, and maybe a woman who'd struggled like Eve had. I think she recognized that in Eve. I call them both dirty girls because growing up, they were both scorned for looking different, for being poor, for being different. And I think about the dirty girls. I got that from just thinking about when I was in elementary school and junior high, how quickly people who may have just their whole flaw was that they didn't have money. They didn't have the money to fit in, to buy the clothes to fit in. And I just think this all goes back to Marilyn and Eve both being dirty girls and wanting credit for what they achieved coming from scorn. Neither of them should have made it. Marilyn, I don't know how she made it, and I think that's what her demise was, because she had a foundation of sand. She had no love to stand on. She grew up very unloved and abused sexually, mentally, emotionally. I think she was really proud, and she wanted somebody to see her for who she was and how strong she was and how brave she was. Because Marilyn actually wasn't just a dirty girl. She was a feral girl. I don't think she had any upbringing in how to be and how to respond to situations. She was as feral could be. And I think she was proud that she achieved all she achieved coming from that.
Mm. Absolutely. I think that shared experience of poverty too, it's interesting to me how like they're both experienced this being outsiders because coming from a different class and for all sorts of other reasons that the two of them each have respectively, that gets you primed to sort of like perform to fit in, you know? And I think that like Eve and Marilyn have very different relationships and feelings about that need to perform. Like Eve is like, absolutely not. I am just myself. Like no makeup, no lipstick, I don't like. And Marilyn is like leans into it and is absolutely willing to use that performance to further her own goals.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's true. They approached it from different angles, but they ended up in the same place.
Mhm.
That they really were, I think they were both interested too, in the inner lives of others. Eve had a chance to make a career out of that. She really was obsessed with showing the inner workings of her subjects, and she photographed everybody in her time period. And her time period was long. She lived to 99 and a half years old, or actually she was like a few days short of her 100th birthday. And she relished and was superior at bringing out people. She must have had some extra special gift that people could feel that they were safe with her, that their inner selves were welcome to come out and would be cherished, because she got it time and time again from people. It's just Marilyn's the prime example because again, she doesn't even look like herself in other photos. But back to, people caring about the inner person and nurturing them. I think Marilyn was really a very sensitive to others, people, because of what you say, because she was an outsider. I think outsiders have a real advantage. And I talk about this in the book, because this was true for Eve as a photographer. Being an outsider really helps you to look inside. You're set apart. You can look and see the inner workings. It's harder when you're in the inside. And so I think Marilyn, coming from the outside, kind of knew how to work it a little better but she also really cared, and she had a really soft, loving heart.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think getting to know any person ultimately, whether that's somebody in your life or a historical figure with whom you've never interacted, is
Mhm.
sort of like about coming to like, if not understand, but accept the contradictions that seem like they are there, because she was a little bit naive, but she was also not cynical, but like pragmatic in the way that she could, work situations to her advantage. She was incredibly intelligent and witty, but she would often perform like a sort of little girl act in order to get what she wanted from certain types of men. There are all these things that seem like contradictions, but just that like when you accept them all, like you sort of get the best picture of the person you're gonna get kind of.
Right. And I think again, this comes from her being feral, that she didn't know not to be uber sexy. She didn't know not to be. I mean, some of it, and I don't mean that to be naive. She just didn't know. And she's like, I'm going to go for this. And she didn't realize, that how outside the norm she was at times. Um, there's an incident in the book where Marilyn, in early on in Eve's relationship, Eve was invited to Marilyn's hotel room and Marilyn was going to have an interview with a French reporter. And I'm trying to think how to put this all in a friendly way, but at the interview, Marilyn shocked Eve and shocked the reporter by, first of all, she showed up in a see-through nightgown, just totally see-through, and like, what you're wearing that to an interview? And then things went badly in the interview, and Marilyn ended up kind of exposing herself briefly. And Eve reports that so many times. I've seen so many interviews where she reports that incident, And she reported that in her book. And I think she reported that because I think she could not understand it. It really, she did not know what was going on there. And she could see how it hurt Marilyn. It was a very feral thing to do. Um, and so I talked to some psychologists. I talked to a psychoanalyst. I talked to a psychologist about what was going on in that scene. And they said in their different ways that really it was about Marilyn wanting attention. And sort of like they're saying, like voyeurs, exhibitionists, the worst thing you could do to them is it like a flasher flashes, just going, or like put it away. They want to shock. They want to be noticed. They'll go to that ends, anything to be noticed. And that's what these psychologists were thinking, is that she just wanted to be noticed. She'd go to that length because she wasn't getting attention. But it, to me as well, says that she didn't know the boundaries. She didn't know that, yeah, that would get her attention, but it would not be taken well. But anyhow, so she did a few things like that were like most people wouldn't do because they knew better. But I think she just didn't always know better. And that's not to say she's naive or stupid. She just grew up with no instruction or love at all.
Yeah, she pretty much raised herself in many ways. And, she is so calculated and controlling of her image, but she does slip up every once in a while and sort of
Yeah.
like let a little bit of that feral interior show. I think that, Eve is really almost in a way like a lovely avatar for you, like asking the same questions about Marilyn that you are. Um, and I think that is expressed in a lovely way through the person of the book, because you not only tell the book in the first person from Eve's perspective, but you also include the second person addressing Marilyn, and that's a very lovely, I think, way of exploring the story.
It's funny. Maybe for the first 6 months or so that I wrote the book, I did not do it that way. I did not do Marilyn. In fact, did I do it all in third person? I can't even remember. But I didn't have Marilyn addressed in the book as you the whole time. And then one day when I was writing, it just kind of popped up. I called her you, as as Eve was thinking about Marilyn. And I thought, this makes sense. I mean, it was one of the biggest revelations I had writing the book. It's like, this is her voice. This is what's happening. It's Eve talking to Marilyn, expressing her regrets and her love. And once I knew that book, I wrote itself. It was an amazing shock. It was just me letting Eve talk to Marilyn through through me. And it was really fun, really fun. I love writing this book. And you could probably tell I fell so in love with these two women. I just respect and adore, and they amuse me. So it was just really fun. And I hope readers pick up some of that, some of my love story for them.
Absolutely. I fell in love with them too. And it is such a lovely book. And thank you so much for coming to share it with us. Just before we wrap up, I know that, authors can't always talk about what they're working on, but what's on the horizon for you? Are you writing now?
I'm I think many of us authors, if we aren't writing, we're sick. And I am working on something, but it's not enough off the ground to even talk about at this point. But rest assured, I'm working on something, because when I'm not, and I'm not even totally locked into this, and so I'm not totally sleeping well at night. But there's always something on the horizon. I love the research, as a fellow historian, the just learning about the history of something. I'm off to the races on this one subject. So we'll see. I hope I can say in 6 months from now, or even like next month, what it is.
That's great. Well, happy research. That is, my favorite part of the process too. Thank you for taking time out of your schedule to talk to us.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. Listeners, it's your turn now. Please check out When We Were Brilliant. By the time that you hear this, it'll be out in the world. So head to your favorite bookstore or library website. Do you have a favorite bookstore that you like to send people to?
It's like children. I have three children, and I could never honestly say who is a favorite so I have several local ones that I adore here in Atlanta and spend a lot of time with. Close by, I go to Eagle Eye, and there's Annelle Gerson at Book Miser. Uh, there's Foxtail. There's there's just so many really good ones, and I feel bad even mentioning some because I'm excluding others. But that's a whole nother subject for a talk. The proliferation these days of bookstores. I hope other cities are like Atlanta, but we have new ones popping up all the time, and it's the greatest for readers. It's really exciting.
Yeah, it's great. Well, you've named a whole bunch of really great stores. So in that spirit, maybe privilege your independent bookstore, your local independent bookstore when you are picking up this book.
Yes.
Okay, it is time to close this chapter. We'll see you next time.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.